Welcome. This is the First Fleet. The First Fleet was the beginning of one of Australia's most important men.
See if there's any meat today.
Hopefully. After last time there weren't much.
James Ruse, a convict that was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for stealing 2 silver watches. Hungry. And like everyone else in the prison colony. Desperate. At this moment, they realized that their supplies were too short. And they couldn't rely on rare English ships. So, as a farmer, James thought of something. Something that would change this nation forever. But before we get to that, we'll have to go back to James's home country, his birthplace. His domain. The 9th of August, 1760. In the fine countryside of Cornwall, a child is born. The child is nurtured and nourished regularly, due to large farms. The boy is later taught how to farm himself. How to provide for himself. The boy continues to practice farming until it is his career, his nutrition, his survival. He uses the skills he was taught, and the skills that he taught himself to become one of the most renowned farmers of the time. But, a few years later, farming systems change. New and unseen technology reels in. Acts of Parliament forcing closures. Farms are split up. New crops are used. And selective breeding arises, and is used at full throttle. James Ruse was not selling enough goods, and was being overrun by the new farmers, in terms of business. James was now struggling to stay on top. And because of not being efficient with the land, and establishing it to full use, he was forced out of his farm. With no more farms available, or jobs at the countryside, he was forced to move to a town. James Ruse moved to the town of Bodmin, located in Cornwall. The town of Bodmin, like all other English towns at the time, was unhygienic, crammed, small for its population, and was definitely not looked after. This abominable town turned out as it did, due to the greediness and negligence of employers and business owners. Employers paid an average wage of roughly 17 shillings a week to men, and about 6 shillings to women. At Bodmin, James Ruse was working up to 18 hours a day, and was earning an extremely low wage, one that could not support him. Because famine was fast approaching, and James Ruse was not earning enough, he had no choice. He smuggled up to the house of Thomas Olive, and took his chance. He entered, grabbed 2 silver watches, and other goods, as the judge later said. James was charged with breaking and entering, also stealing, from the house of Tom Olive in 1782. He was sentenced to death. But like many other sentences, it was changed to 7 years transportation to Australia. This was to help populate and colonize the newly found land, to make it self-sufficient. Sending James Ruse just might make that English ambition come true. Ruse was placed onto the Scarborough. Designed by the Hopper brothers, and built by Hewlett Fowler, it was one of the stronger ships of the First Fleet. But what many people didn't know, was what was happening on it. At first, James Ruse was dragged onto the ship, beaten, and tied in chains. They used similar techniques, punishments, and coercion that they used for slaves at the time. Convicts were punished for resisting, abusing, rioting, and similar actions. One of the most common punishments was being whipped by the cat o' nine tails. It took a long 5.5 years to reach Australia. But when they did, James Ruse obtained 18 months of his sentence, as it lasted for 7 years. Therefore, he had to continue working when he arrived. The first step for the British on Australia was conducted by Arthur Phillip, a Royal Navy officer. Arthur Phillip raised the British flag upon arrival, at a place called Botany Bay. Arthur Phillip quickly assembled the colony, and created a camp. People worked to construct tents, houses, bridges and weaponry. But none of them knew how to generate food. how to farm. So James Ruse offered to create and operate the first Australian farm. The sense behind this offering was that he and his new partner, Elizabeth Perry, were exasperated on the amount of work that the officers demanded to be conducted by one being. And James didn't want to continue his life as it was at Bodmin. He could only blame the Industrial Revolution. Arthur accepts. The fertilization technique that James uses requires burning plants and spreading the ashes. He learned this technique as a little farm boy. Even through the use of this technique, his first crop fails as he was unfamiliar with the conditions and seasons. But he refuses to back down. From the shriveled crops, they output just enough seeds to commence the second. The convicts worked the land. Without a deluge, their second crop dries out.
It's no use.
Then, when all seems impossible, a mighty flood of rain emerges. Their crop is saved. They become the first colonists to feed themselves.